Yesterday, you might remember overhearing that my eldest stepson and his wife are returning home for the birth of their child. So, my mother-in-law asked me to clear out my belongings and move them into the yard. Her reasoning was that since I can't have children and I don't assist with my stepson's business, the least I could do was make space. Despite my contributing $33,000 annually in rent, this demand felt overwhelming. Living with my mother-in-law is challenging. The house always seems full with my brother-in-law, his wife, and my husband as well. Despite my efforts to maintain harmony and keep the household running smoothly, the constant demands and the cramped living conditions have become too much. Finally fed up, I agreed to leave. Although I refused to simply leave my possessions outside, I planned to return for them later. After announcing my decision to leave, my mother-in-law simply thanked me, ignoring my protests. I quickly packed up and left the house. Just seconds after stepping outside, I took out my phone and called a junk removal service to handle my belongings. I'm Natalie, a 40-year-old web developer. My husband Jace, also 39, manages 4 restaurants. We're the same age, and many assume we've been married for a long time and have children, but we actually just tied the knot recently. Both of us were dedicated workaholics, and didn't marry until later in life. I had nearly given up on the idea of marriage just before I turned 39. But one evening, after a particularly demanding day at work, I decided to treat myself by visiting a trendy bar I'd been curious about. It was there, comfortably seated at the bar, that I met Jace. He was the owner and struck up a conversation with a welcoming smile. He made it comfortable for someone like me, who was there alone, by saying, "We have many women who come here by themselves, so feel free to visit anytime." That night marked the beginning of our unexpected journey together. As a new customer, dining alone at Jace's restaurant initially seemed daunting to me, given that I didn't have many friends to join me. Yet, the warm service and friendly environment quickly made me feel at ease. I found myself frequenting the place, often choosing a spot at the end of the bar. This spot became my regular seat, where Jace would engage in casual conversations with me while I dined. One evening, as we talked about work, Jace asked about my profession. "I'm a web developer," I explained. "I introduce technology solutions to companies and assist with strategic planning. I've even worked with general manager restaurants, recommending systems like a tablet-based ordering system to cut down on labor costs and boost efficiency." Intrigued, Jace wanted to know more about the cost implications for his own small establishment. I quickly crunched some numbers on my phone and showed him, but he was skeptical about the investment, deeming it too steep for his business scale. Despite his initial hesitations, Jace was always keen to learn from our dialogues. He valued the insights and looked for ways to implement new ideas into his restaurant, which I admired deeply. Over time, our discussions weren't just exchanges of knowledge, they were building a bond between us. Jace appreciated my hardworking nature, and I was drawn to his dedication. One day, breaking through our usual routine of casual talk, Jace suggested, "I'm always busy with work and don't get much social time. How about we go out for dinner sometime?" Thrilled by the prospect of dining out with a restaurateur, I eagerly accepted. Although I felt like a giddy teenager at the idea of a date, at nearly 39, I found it slightly embarrassing to admit. It wasn't just a one-time invitation. Jace continued to ask me out for meals, and naturally, as two adults who enjoyed each other's company and shared frequent meals, we developed a romantic relationship. 3 years later, as we both approached our 39 RD birthdays, we decided it was time to get married. Being a bride at 39 felt a bit shy to me, so I suggested to Jace that we forego a traditional wedding ceremony. Instead, we celebrated our union by dressing up and taking photographs. After the marriage, I moved into Jace's residence, a spacious 4-story house with a garden and parking, located in a posh neighborhood. The rent for such a place was around $38,000 a month, a substantial sum reflecting its upscale setting. Jace had been living there with his mother, which set the stage for our new life together. Despite potential complexities of blending family dynamics, I was ready to start this new chapter with him. Living with a mother-in-law immediately after getting married might seem daunting to many, but at 39, I felt mature enough to handle it. Plus, My mother-in-law was 68, and since my father-in-law had passed away, it felt like a necessary arrangement. When my husband first proposed the idea of us living with his mother, I quickly agreed, thinking it wouldn't be too much of a challenge. However, I soon began to question that decision. After moving into my husband's spacious house, I was allocated not just a shared bedroom with him, but also a personal office space, which was a pleasant surprise. The house was large, with many unused rooms, making it seem excessively big for just 3 people. Curious, I asked my husband why he had chosen such a grand home. He explained that he has an elder brother who had become quite distant. After college, his brother had drifted, moving from job to job, rarely keeping in touch, and occasionally finding himself in troublesome situations. My husband and his mother had opted for a larger home on the off chance his brother decided to return. While I was setting up my books and getting my new office in order, my husband shared more about his brother, Atlas, with a hopeful smile. It was clear he held no ill feelings toward his wandering sibling. Suddenly, my mother-in-law appeared at the doorway, her tone less forgiving as she cautioned, "Don't talk too much about that kid. What if he really comes back?" It was evident she harbored some resentment towards her elder son for his unreliable ways. I sensed a potential conflict between my husband and his mother regarding Atlas, which worried me. My mother-in-law, perhaps sensing my unease, bluntly added, "I'm not too fond of the situation either, but let's make it clear from the start since we're going to be living together." She then walked away, her slippers echoing softly down the hallway. "I'm sorry about that," my husband apologized, seeing the discomfort her words had caused. "Don't worry, I got a similar talk when we first met. I'll build a good relationship with your mother as we live together," I reassured him, determined to make the best of our living arrangement and foster a positive atmosphere in our new expansive home. I gently took a book from my husband's hands, which he had momentarily put aside, and placed it on the shelf. "It seems she's not fond of my age," I remarked thoughtfully. "At 39, I'm certainly not too old to consider having children, but I could understand why the idea might seem daunting to some. Moreover, Jace's older brother Atlas remains unmarried and childless, heightening my mother-in-law's worries about never seeing grandchildren from her eldest son. This disappointment likely fed her wish that Jace had chosen a younger partner, someone who could give her the grandchildren she longed for. In her eyes, Atlas, who shirks his responsibilities as the eldest, and I, unable to meet her expectations as a wife, are disappointingly alike. I empathized with her feelings, but there was nothing I could do about my age. As Jace and I settled into married life, my mother-in-law's cool demeanor towards me became evident. She often ignored my attempts at conversation and seemed to avoid my presence. It was a lonely existence, but without any hostility or physical conflict, it felt manageable, at least for the moment. I hoped that over time, perhaps, I could forge a bond with her. My more pressing worry, however, was Jace's well-being. "How are you holding up with work?" I asked one evening as he sat slumped over the dining table, his head cradled in his hands. "It's not going well. I need to make some tough decisions soon, but arranging the finances is a nightmare," he confessed, his voice heavy with stress. I paused my chores and sat across from him to lend a listening ear. Jace elaborated on the grim situation. Rising prices, escalating expenses, and tightening customer budgets threatened the survival of our business. "If things don't change, I might have to close another store," he said, worry etching deeper into his features. About a year into our marriage, the troubles at Jace's restaurant had intensified. One of the 4 locations had already shut down, and now another closure loomed ominously. Seeing Jace so troubled pained me, yet my mother-in-law appeared indifferent to these struggles. "You're Jace's wife, but you don't help out at the store. You just stick to your own job. Can you truly say you're fulfilling your role as a wife?" She suddenly snapped from her spot on the sofa, having overheard our conversation. Her words, steeped in judgment and frustration, cut through the room, adding to the already tense atmosphere. As I pondered her thoughts, I realized that she often viewed things from a different angle. "Jace, my husband has successfully run his own restaurant for 12 years, navigating numerous obstacles along the way. I was confident he would overcome the current challenge too. Despite this, his wife's expression seemed to convey doubt, almost as if she were adding to his stress, pushing him towards failure. "What a dreadful wife!" she exclaimed loudly from the living room into the dining area, her words sharp and bitter. Although her harsh remarks seemed intended to provoke me, I chose to take them constructively and committed myself fully to supporting Jace, offering him a comforting smile in his moment of anxiety. A year later, just as I had believed, Jace managed to revive his business and prevent the closure of his second store. "See, I told you." A foolish wife who can't even trust her own husband will only hold him back, she criticized again, and as a consequence, my usually distant mother-in-law began to openly criticize me. While our relationship appeared to deteriorate, I took solace in the fact that Jace's business was thriving, considering it a tolerable compromise. However, the equilibrium I felt was misleading. As Jace's business stabilized and grew financially, he seemed to lose focus, and soon, whispers of his infidelity reached me. I pondered the mismanagement of newfound resources and how quickly adverse situations could escalate a concept I was familiar with, but never imagined would personally affect me. One day, news came that his girlfriend was expecting. It was a shock. She was a 29-year-old who worked at the same bar as Jace. Adding to the complexity, Atlas, a website content writer who was the father-to-be, approached us with a significant request. Struggling with the impending financial strain of a newborn, Atlas and his girlfriend asked if they could move into our home and work at the restaurant. I was still processing how to address Jace's affair when my mother-in-law started a conversation with him about Atlas, a man I had never met, and I was left out of their discussion entirely. Previously, she had little regard for Atlas, criticizing him for not fulfilling his duties as the eldest son. Yet now, with a grandchild on the way, she was eager to support him, even suggesting offering them a place to live and employment. Caught in this turning tide, I watched from the dining area as Jace, visibly concerned, caught my gaze. "Come on, it's a good thing," I reasoned. "Atlas is in a tight spot, and you, Jace, have the means to help him." Recognizing the gravity and the opportunity in the situation, I sighed. "All right, I understand." Jace often found it difficult to assert himself against his mother, and I had secretly hoped he would start standing up for himself. Unfortunately, it turned out to be wishful thinking. I caught him glancing over at me, his eyes filled with concern about how I was handling everything. The mounting issues, my strained relationship with my mother-in-law, Jace's affair, and now the constant presence of Atlas and his growing family were all becoming too much. Feeling utterly overwhelmed and unsure of where to even begin addressing these problems, I decided to put everything on hold and just go to bed. The next day was a holiday, and due to my sheer mental exhaustion, I slept in until late morning. Jace had gone to work early, leaving just my mother-in-law and me at home. Reluctantly, I headed to the living room, bracing myself for her inevitable comments about my late start to the day. "You sure slept in. Must be nice to have such leisure," she remarked sharply. I tensed, preparing myself for her usual critiques about not fulfilling my duties as a wife. However, what she said next was far more shocking than I'd anticipated. "You heard Jace and me talking yesterday, right? Atlas and his wife are coming back for a maternity leave visit. So move your stuff out to the yard." I blinked, wondering if I was still groggy from sleep. Did she really mean for me to live in the yard, or was she actually telling me to leave the house? "You can't have kids anyway, and you don't help with Jace's business, so you should at least make room for Atlas and his family. We have 2 spare rooms left, so if you leave and your office is free, we can have a bedroom and a nursery for Atlas's family, and a storage room for their stuff. Don't you think the room count and usage are just perfect?" It was clear she was indeed telling me to leave, suggesting a storage room for Atlas's family. Initially, I was allowed to use the office because there were spare rooms. I didn't mind losing the office. A bedroom for Jace and me was sufficient. Atlas's family could live here without me having to leave. As I realized my mother-in-law no longer saw any reason for me to stay in the house, especially since she would now have her grandchild around, I thought about the $33,000 I was paying in rent. I was too tired to deal with all this. I decided to clear my mind and rest silently with my mother-in-law, the only sound in the living room being the ticking of the clock. After resting, I decided it was time to leave. It was too much trouble to worry about what would happen to Jace, my mother-in-law, Atlas's family, and their future. Understood. I'll leave, I announced, though I couldn't just leave all my belongings in the yard. I'll come back later to pick them up. Thank you, that helps, my mother-in-law said, seemingly pleased. Ignoring her, I began packing my things and left the house. 7 seconds after stepping out the door, I took out my phone and called a junk removal service. My decision, made after halting my overthinking, was unstoppable. I left the house and decided to stay at a hotel for a while. I had called the junk removal service, but they needed some time to prepare, which worked out since I needed some time too. 3 weeks after leaving, I rented an apartment and began living alone. I haven't heard from Jace since then. He probably thinks I'll come back eventually. The thought of Jace taking the current situation lightly infuriates me. However, today is the day after his restaurant's day off, and I expect a call from Jace when he visits the restaurant for lunch. Crap. Hey, what's going on? The restaurant was completely deserted, just as I suspected it would be when Jace called. He suggested over the phone that it would be more effective to discuss things in person, especially if his mother was there. I'm heading to the house now, can you come back? You can't open the restaurant anyway, right? I couldn't help but laugh before hanging up, amused by his seemingly urgent tone. Still chuckling, I prepared to return to the house. Upon my arrival, my mother-in-law was already in a frenzy. What on earth is this? The restaurant's fridge, cooking equipment, tables, all the important stuff is gone. You did this, didn't you? Do you think you can get away with this for free? It was clear that Jace had only shared part of the story with her. In the living room, I noticed an unfamiliar couple, apparently Atlas and his wife. They appeared confused and anxious, not fully understanding the situation or my mother-in-law's intense anger. Why would you do such a thing? The restaurant can't operate now. She continued to rant. It's my restaurant, so I believe I should have no issues starting the closure process or having the items I bought disposed of by a junk removal service, I calmly responded. Huh, your restaurant? What are you talking about? My mother-in-law demanded. Why don't you explain, Jace? You haven't told your mom, have you? Remember, I still own the main restaurant and the second branch, and the second one was in a financial crisis, right? I looked directly at Jace, prompting him to confirm. Yes, of course, Jace muttered, acknowledging the financial struggles and my efforts to rejuvenate the failing branch. You worked hard to turn it around, changing the tables, chairs, signboard, the restaurant's atmosphere, bringing in new cooking equipment, expanding the menu, and replacing the fridge and freezer to accommodate the new menu. Well, about that. He hesitated, then added, Natalie actually paid for those expenses. What? What do you mean? My mother-in-law interjected, her expression one of confusion and surprise. She seemed to be trying hard to piece everything together, but clearly lacked the full context to understand the implications of Jace's admission. Jace continued, looking visibly uncomfortable as if he was withholding more than he was sharing, but it was evident that the conversation was finally bringing to light the extent of my involvement and financial contribution to the restaurant's survival. Facing a room filled with tension and disbelief, I felt it was time to clarify everything. Before I turned 39, I was single and had a career in consulting. Jace and I didn't have a lavish wedding, nor did we purchase a new home after getting married, which allowed me to accumulate significant savings. When Jace's second restaurant branch began floundering, I lent him $570,000 to help revitalize it. However, simply handing over such a large sum to your spouse isn't straightforward. To formalize the arrangement and protect my investment, I decided to purchase the ownership rights to the second branch. Although I entrusted most of the day-to-day management to Jace, the key change was that he shifted his focus from the main branch to revitalize this one. During a time of crisis at the restaurant, when my mother-in-law criticized me for not showing enough trust in Jace, I decided to support him wholeheartedly. My support took the form of investing the money I had saved from my single years. Jace, is this true? She asked. Yes, it's true, he confirmed. She said it was okay if I failed, but since it was such a large amount, she suggested becoming the owner. The plan was to pay back the borrowed $570,000 from the restaurant's earnings, but it was simpler for Natalie to become the owner and have the restaurant's income go directly to her. It also meant that she could decide whether to close the restaurant or not. It's a lie! Can something like that really happen? My mother-in-law exclaimed in disbelief. I understood her skepticism, so I'd come prepared. I swiftly spread out documents across the table: business license, transfer of rights agreement, and lease agreement confirming my ownership of the restaurant. Her face turned red as she saw my name emblazoned on each document. Why didn't you say anything about this? You always talked about how you believed in Jace and how the restaurant was recovering, right? She demanded. Even before we were married, I always encouraged Jace. He felt the weight of your expectations, not wanting to disappoint you or fail in his role as the head of the household. Despite this, your attitude towards people like Atlas and myself has often been quite cold. This moment, with all the facts laid bare, was a turning point in how we all understood and appreciated each other's roles and contributions within the family. Given the situation, I decided it was crucial to lay everything out clearly. Before I turned 39, I was single and worked in consulting. Since Jace and I didn't spend extravagantly on a wedding or a new home, I had managed to save a considerable amount of money. When Jace's second restaurant branch started struggling, I lent him $570,000 to help revitalize it. However, lending such a significant sum to your spouse is not straightforward. To formalize the deal and ensure some security for my investment, I opted to purchase the ownership rights to that branch. While I left the daily operations to Jace, this shift meant he focused more on turning around this branch than on the primary one. The crisis at Jace's restaurant was a serious concern for us both, but it was after my mother-in-law criticized me for not showing enough trust in Jace that I decided to give my full support. This meant using the savings from my years of single life to help him. When questioned about this by my mother-in-law, Jace confirmed it was true. She said it was okay if I failed, but given the amount involved, she preferred to become the owner. If it was going to fail, we planned to pay back the $570,000 from the restaurant's earnings, but it made more sense for Natalie to be the owner so she could receive the income directly. This also allowed her the final say on whether to keep the restaurant open or not. My mother-in-law was shocked, exclaiming, "It's a lie. Can something like that really happen?" I understood her disbelief, which is why I had brought evidence. I laid out documents such as the business license, transfer of rights agreement, and lease agreement on the table, all bearing my name as the owner of the restaurant. Her face turned red as she confirmed my name on those documents. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" she challenged. "You always seemed so supportive of Jace and spoke of how well the restaurant was recovering." Before we were married, I indeed encouraged Jace consistently. He felt the weight of expectations from his mother, striving not to disappoint her as the head of the household. However, this created a situation where people like me and Atlas, who didn't meet her strict expectations, were treated coldly. "That's why Jace couldn't tell you he borrowed a large sum from me," I explained. "He knew you would react negatively," she protested. "He could have just told me." But the truth was, Jace couldn't speak openly because of her tendency to get upset easily. Often, people like my mother-in-law don't realize they're putting immense pressure on others. They might think they are merely expressing their expectations, not seeing the stress and challenges they impose. In moments like these, what seems like a minor issue to one can be an immense burden to another. Expressing these concerns isn't as straightforward as it might seem. There's always the fear that speaking up will only lead to disappointment and complaints. It was crucial to protect Jace's spirit, especially since the restaurant was beginning to recover. That's why I remained silent, even though I deeply wished I hadn't when the situation with Atlas and his family returning came up. Jace probably assumed it was work-related and agreed without giving it too much thought. During a tense moment at home, Jace turned to me, his expression somber. "Kathy," he said, "I'm sorry. This mess is my fault. If I had managed the restaurant properly from the start, you wouldn't have had to lend your money." And if I hadn't been so weak, I could have been honest with my mother about everything. Concerned about the repercussions of closing the restaurant, his mother interjected. But what about the part-time workers? Don't worry, I reassured her over the past 3 weeks. I've informed everyone about the impending closure, and they all understood. For those interested, I've managed to arrange part-time jobs at other restaurants through my IT consulting contacts. That's a relief, she sighed, her main concern addressed. So everyone knew about this? Yes, Jace said upright. In a moment of reflection, my mother-in-law apologized. Jace, Natalie, I'm sorry too. I've been pressuring both of you too much. Natalie, I won't tell you to leave again. It seemed like everything was smoothing over, but for me, the resolution was far from satisfactory. Let's settle this next matter, I said as I placed the divorce papers on the table. Jace picked them up, his hands shaking in shock. What does this mean? Why a divorce? This was supposed to be about reconciliation, wasn't it? Don't assume we've reconciled, I countered. You might think your affair with the part-timer was a secret, but I'm aware of it. All the part-time workers knew too. That's just a rumor. You can't say things like that without proof, Jace protested. Without a word, I pulled out my smartphone and displayed a photo that a part-time worker had sent me. It showed Jace entering a hotel, a clear indication of his actions. This photo of you was taken by one of the part-timers. If you leave the restaurant together and head towards the nearby hotel district, anyone can capture such evidence, not just police or detectives. Did getting the second branch back on track give you too much confidence? You really let it go to your head. As the owner, I wasn't involved in day-to-day operations, but I still visited the restaurant occasionally. That's when the part-time workers confided in me about Jace's affair and offered their support. They sent me proof and even helped keep the closure of the restaurant a secret from him. Amidst the rising tension, Jace, still trying to absorb the shock, asked, Wait, if we're closing the second branch and divorcing, what's going to happen with the rent for this place? His mother, unaware of yet another detail, looked puzzled. The rent for this place? What do you mean? I took a deep breath and revealed I've been paying the entire rent of $33,000 a month for this house. Is that also true? She asked Jace, her voice a mixture of disbelief and dread. It's true, Jace confirmed quietly, as the reality of the entire situation began to settle around us. As the restaurant's revenue continued to decline, I found myself covering more and more of our expenses, until eventually I was paying the entire rent $33,000 a month. This amount equaled my own salary, so while I took care of the rent, Jace handled other living expenses like food and utilities. With the looming divorce and Jace potentially only having the main restaurant left, maintaining our current lifestyle and staying in this house was no longer viable. Jace and my mother-in-law seemed to deflate upon hearing this news, their posture slumping as if they had just gone several rounds in a boxing match. The gravity of the situation became clear, and Atlas and his wife, now somewhat grasping the reality, hesitantly joined the conversation. What does that mean for us? We came back here thinking we could live here? Atlas asked, confusion and worry evident in his voice. Wait, this is different from what we were told. We thought everything would be fine once we got back, his wife added, her tone one of dismay. Sorry, Atlas. Right now, I don't have the means to help you with a restaurant or a house, I explained. We're actually reducing staff costs, not hiring more, especially with the restaurant's closure. Come on, do something. We're having a baby. At least give me a job, Atlas pleaded. We have enough part-timers. In fact, we need to cut down, I replied, trying to manage his expectations. Jace will work hard, so just wait a bit longer. That was the breaking point for Atlas. What about my house and job now? He shouted, his frustration boiling over. The conversation turned into an argument about their future, involving Jace, my mother-in-law, and Atlas, while Atlas's wife, whose name I still didn't know, looked increasingly uncomfortable and out of place. Having delivered the news about the restaurant's closure and the divorce, I realized my business here was done. Tired of constantly trying to mediate with Jace and his family, and refusing to be dragged into living arrangements with Atlas.